cows and the natural digestion of the plants that they're eating produce methane, and they belch it out. People, you can see sometimes funny cartoons of coming out the other end, but really, the vast majority of the methane is coming through exhalations and burps of the cows.
Hey everybody, we all know you can't eat money, but I must have been hungry when booking guests recently. After a great episode with Adam Bent of Scout Canning, we are back with Jenna Evans, the Global Sustainability Manager of Ben & Jerry's. I am a huge fan of Ben & Jerry's, both as a brand and as a product. So much so, in fact, I never let my terrible ski skills get in the way of trekking up to Vermont with friends for ski trips, just so I could visit the Ben & Jerry's factory in Burlington. This chat was just as much of a treat. We talk with Jenna about a variety of topics, from cow burps and climate resilience for dairy farmers to environmental and social justice and her work to help Ben & Jerry's divest from plastics. Thanks so much to Jenna for making the time to chat, and thank you all for listening. Here's the latest episode of You Can't Eat Money with Jenna Evans, Global Sustainability Manager at Ben & Jerry's. So, hey, Jenna, thanks so much for joining us today on the podcast. It'd be great if we could start off with a little bit of an introduction about yourself and your role at Ben & Jerry's and maybe some of the highlights of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, like I said, my name's Jenna Evans. I've been in the sustainability field for over 15 years now, but I started out really studying energy and the environment and ended up getting a master's degree in environmental management from Yale University. I've spent nearly all of my career in the dairy industry, not because that was my lifelong goal, it's just sort of where I landed, but then it's a field that's really interesting. And I was able to develop my career throughout several different companies in the dairy industry. My role here at Ben & Jerry's is focused mainly, it's a global role that's focusing mainly on the climate strategy of the company, as well as sustainable packaging.
Amazing. And so what does your day-to-day job look like at Ben & Jerry's?
It's one of the great things that I love about my job is that it's different every day. There's not like a typical day. Some days I'm on a podcast like today. Other days I'm doing a lot of editing of blogs and things that we want to explain to the public. And then there's other days where I'm out in the field with farmers and trying to work on, making change from a climate perspective in our supply chain. So it's a really interesting role. There's never the same day twice.
Awesome. That sounds like fun. Nice to have a little bit of office time, but then also go play around in the mud a little bit with the farmers and the cows, I imagine.
It's not mud though.
Oh. In terms of your thinking about your day-to-day job and kind of what you just described in terms of working with the farmers, but also working on the communication side, what are some of the biggest challenges that you face?
There's a lot of challenges in sustainability. One of the typical ones I feel like, which I don't actually experience regularly, is financing. But I hear from many of my colleagues in the field, and I'm sure if anybody's in the sustainability field listening to this, they'll totally understand that you're usually begging for money for your projects. Ben & Jerry's is very progressive in that we have an accrual every month that basically puts aside money dedicated to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and that's my budget. So I'm very lucky in that sense. But the work is slow. One of the big challenges is a lot of education, like all the time, even both internal to the company, but also external. And so you're constantly having to either educate or re-educate people about the science and the why and the how. So that can be a challenge. Climate science and just greenhouse gas emissions is not something that most people think about on a daily basis. And so that can be the communication and education can be a bit tricky internally.
what is sort of your process or your, what do you have to go through basically to be able to understand not just the scope 1 emissions that are within Ben and Jerry's direct control, but also those scope 3 emissions that maybe are a little bit more indirect and, aren't necessarily in your backyard or in the office where you work?
Right. So for us to get a sense of really where our emissions lie in like the global supply chain, the global footprint of Ben and Jerry's, we had to start by doing a carbon footprint of the company. So we worked with a third party to do this carbon footprint. And one thing that your listeners may not know is that carbon footprints are estimates. They're based on, the latest science around emissions factors, which that might be too techy of a word, but it's always evolving. And so our estimate of our carbon footprint is how we sort of laid out the roadmap of what we were going to do. And one of the things that we learned is that our scope 1, which means like our direct fuel use, like fuel oil or natural gas, and our scope 2 emissions, which means electricity used, are really small when you compare them against our global footprint. And so it's actually, in fact, we estimate it's only about 1% of our global footprint. And so when you think about that, like everything that we have direct control over is a tiny fraction of our impact. You have to look to scope 3. And the biggest part of our scope 3 lies in dairy farming, which is why we have a really large focus on trying to reduce emissions on dairy farms. But really, we used our carbon footprinting to sort of lay the roadmap of, where are the biggest emissions coming from. We need to tackle those areas, but then simultaneously, you can't ignore, your own backyard. So we're also focusing, even though it's only 1% of our footprint, you have to focus on scope 1 and 2 emissions because that's something you have the control over. And also, what legitimacy do you have if you're asking suppliers to change and you're not changing yourself? So it's a dual focus, I would say.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. So thinking about that, those scope 1 and 2 emissions really only being about 1% or so of Ben and Jerry's footprint. How do you work with those suppliers to, not only show them that you're a credible player and that you're committed to it, but also engaging with them to, maybe improve their practices? I read something about a seaweed trial that you're engaging with a company called Blue Ocean Barns. Maybe that's a good example to talk about too.
Yeah, so scope 3 emissions can be tricky. Depending on who your suppliers are and your approach, I think can dramatically change what the outcome might be. I'm very lucky to have stepped into a role 4 years ago where the company had been for many years developing deep relationships with our dairy supply chain. So we had legitimacy when we had trust between the brand and the farms. So we don't own any of the farms, to be clear. They're independent businesses that are part of a local dairy cooperative. And so that trust is something that we sort of rely on to be able to move forward and take action. We have a program called Caring Dairy, which there's a lot of details on benjerry.com if listeners are interested. But Caring Dairy was not developed as a climate program. It was developed as a way to make dairy the best it can be, I would say. And it addresses things like animal welfare. It addresses on-farm labor. It does address soil health. And it evolves every year, which is really cool. But because it never focused on climate, when I came into my role, that was something that I had been pushing for. And like you mentioned, the seaweed trial is part of this new low carbon dairy initiative that we're starting this year in 2022 to work with about 15 pilot farms between the US and Netherlands. One of the farms in the US is going to be trialing a red seaweed called Aspergopsis taxiformis. It's not going to happen until the fall of 2022, so we don't have any data yet, but we're super excited because a lot of the academic research that has come out about that seaweed variety has shown a dramatic reduction in methane from cow burps. And methane is a really potent greenhouse gas. It has a powerful effect on the climate in the near term, and so to be able to eliminate those emissions is really important.
Maybe it might be interesting to talk a little bit about the cow itself. So cows, as I understand it, they have, I think, 4 stomachs.
4 chambers. I guess, yeah, I'm not a vet or a dairy cow expert, but yeah, there's 4 chambers in their digestion system. They're called, in general, cows or animals with 4 chambers are called ruminants. So cows are one, goats and sheep are also ruminants. And cows, in the natural digestion of the plants that they're eating, produce methane, and they belch it out. People, you can see sometimes funny cartoons of coming out the other end, but really, the vast majority of the methane is coming through exhalations and burps of the cows. Again, it's totally natural, but again, methane is really damaging to the climate. And so we're looking at seaweed as a feed additive, and also other solutions that can really stop the process of methane creation in the rumen.
Super interesting. And so you mentioned a little bit about this when talking about the program with the dairy farmers and helping them understand, probably a little bit deeper level, sort of the ecosystem on their farm, in terms of not just the cow itself and how the milk and dairy product is produced, but also the soil health. So, thinking about something like regenerative agriculture, when it comes to something like cows, like obviously the soil health and the cow's health and what the cow's producing is all interrelated. So how maybe has that changed, or how is Ben and Jerry's trying to do it in a different way compared to maybe what's happened with the large scale sort of production of dairy products over the last 10 to 20 years?
Yeah, so I guess it's important to note, that Ben and Jerry's doesn't work with, the massive commercial farms that people, may see on the news when, dairy can get a bad rap, I think, in the media. We work with small to medium-sized family farms. Historically, we had only worked with a cooperative in Vermont, but have since expanded our dairy supply chain due to high demand for ice cream during COVID. I would say that we are not teaching the farms things as a brand. The farms are experts in their field and know what their farm needs to thrive. What we do as a business is we can provide technical assistance to farmers to improve practices that they're already engaged in. So, for example, we've been working in Vermont. We've been working with the University of Vermont Extension Service for a number of years to study, soil health and different cropping practices. And as part of carrying dairy, we've mandated certain percentages of their cropping fields to use cover crops, have no or low till practices, and do crop rotation. And those practices stacked together have been scientifically shown to improve soil health and outcomes. And so, working with like the true experts on the field, the scientists, not somebody from Ben and Jerry's, is how we are helping farmers sort of adapt practices over time. And that extends to other systems on the farm, such as like manure management. Again, Ben and Jerry's isn't going in and telling farmers what to do, but we are providing technical assistance so that the farm can make the best decision for themselves about how to improve their practices. And we always have in mind both, environmental health as well as the welfare of the animals, the farmers themselves, as well as the labor staff on their farm. So we look at things that trying to reduce synthetic inputs, whether that means pesticides or herbicides, fertilizers and things like that, and try to, improve their system as a whole without, while also benefiting them economically and helping them thrive.
And so I think a lot of people might think of farming as maybe simple, like a little bit clear, easy to understand. And I think what you're explaining and illuminating a bit is that it's actually complex, and like there are technical assistance that is very valuable, especially when it comes with university research and input. So with all the different things that are involved in a farm that eventually creates the dairy product that Ben and Jerry's buys, how do you think about prioritizing those different initiatives, be it either with partners or directly with the farmers themselves?
Yeah, I think it's just to adjust the complexity. It's sort of an understatement to say that it's complex. It's crazy complex. I've been in the industry for 15 years, and talked to lots and lots of farmers and studying how to improve environmental outcomes and things for years, and I still feel like a beginner when you get out on the farm. So yeah, I mean, I feel like from my perspective, where my goal is to reduce emissions, we're very much guided by like, where are the emissions coming from and how can we reduce those. But there's obviously a different focus for the Caring Dairy program that's trying to improve soil health, improve animal welfare, and other things. So it really depends, I guess, on what goal you're aiming for. You prioritize not only what the academic the scientific consensus is, like, here's your prime source of emissions, go after that. We work very collaboratively with our farms. It's never like a parental type role. It's very much collaborative. Like I said before, they are the experts of their field, literally and figuratively, and they know what they're doing. We are there to support them and improve where we think we can together. But we also realize that they face new challenges every single year, whether it's a dramatic change in the milk price or whether it's weather related. They can face droughts or floods or really wet years where it's almost impossible to harvest the grass before it rains again. So they really have to, even if we come up with a game plan at the beginning of the spring, it can't always follow it depending on what the situation is that year. And so they are super adaptable, some of the smartest people you ever meet. And it's a great it's a great group of people to be working with that really care very much about the environment, very much about their animals, and are very proud of the products that they make.
And on that adaptability, a lot of the science that's come out around the more extreme weather events that have been happening around the world over the last couple of years, they say as the climate changes, as the water temperatures are rising, these extreme weather events are probably going to become more common, which I'm going to guess makes farming a lot harder, and even planning sort of a long-term program to sort of mitigate the emissions from the production of something like Ben and Jerry's ice cream becomes even more complex than it probably already was. So how do you think about that adaptability and that resilience when it comes to making sure that not only are you able to eventually put a product on a shelf, but that the people supplying your product feel supported and have whatever assistance that you can provide as the purchaser of their product to help get people the best ice cream?
Yeah. So Ben and Jerry's, as part of like the Caring Dairy program, does provide farmer premiums for farmers to participate in the program. So that does boost the farm economically to varying degrees, because depending on their size and how much they want to, there's different levels of the program. It can boost them economically and allow them to do things that they otherwise may not have been able to do based on the milk price that year, and so forth. A lot of the practices that we're putting into place are going to make the farms more sustainable and I mean sustainable in the business sense, like have a business that will be here in 10 or 20 years. For example, like the regenerative agriculture practices that I mentioned before, the cover cropping, the no to low till, and the crop rotation, all build soil health, and soil that is healthy, has more flood resilience, it has more drought resistance, and so it's going to be able to provide a better crop in years where their fields are facing stress. So I feel like it's sort of a win-win. We're building climate resilience into the farm as they're also improving their soil, which is going to benefit them as well. I think that's probably the best example of climate resilience, is really just building their soil health, because without healthy soil, they're not going to survive as a business.
Sure. And thinking a little bit more broadly, this intersection of social justice, environmental justice, which anyone who's seen Ben and Jerry's, over basically since its beginning knows that Ben and Jerry themselves have been sort of leading at the forefront of different social justice movements. So in your role, how does your role sort of intersect with making sure that Ben and Jerry's is upholding that social justice when it comes to something like environmental justice?
Sure. I mean, at Ben and Jerry's, we really think that, environmental justice and climate justice is social justice. There's not really a distinction, one is the other. So anytime that we're helping, improve the environmental health of a community or a business, or focusing on climate resilience, we're focusing on social justice and particularly, racial justice. The climate issue is, disproportionately affecting marginalized people, Black and Brown people globally, and the issues are very intertwined. One of the things that we've tried to raise up in our packaging work here at Ben & Jerry's is that, plastics has been, at least for the last few decades, or many decades, I would say, been sort of the go-to material for many consumer goods companies. And, plastic is just inextricably linked to, environmental health issues, social justice issues, and climate issues because it's made from oil. So that's one of the things that we're doing, both from a climate and a social justice perspective, is like we're trying to get out of plastics. We don't think that recycling is the answer for plastics. We've seen it fail for decades, and we're just trying to divest from that now.
How would you describe sort of Ben & Jerry's corporate culture such that it can be a really progressive organization, especially in a category, ice cream, that maybe people wouldn't associate with being sort of on the leading forefoot of progress, social movement, climate justice, all of that? Like, what about Ben & Jerry's makes it uniquely capable of wanting to address this and encouraging people inside the company to kind of lead on this front?
Yes, I mean, I think the founder story, so Ben Cohen and Jerry Greenfield, really set the tone, decades ago, over 40 years ago, about what Ben & Jerry's is going to be about. If you listen to their founding story at all, they weren't necessarily set on ice cream. They had thought about bagels or something else. But what was really visionary is that they wanted business to be a force for good. And that had set the tone for 40 years of the business. So back in 2000, about halfway through our history, we were acquired by Unilever. And sometimes when a smaller, progressive brand is bought out by a large global company, they can sort of lose their identity, or their mission can kind of go astray. But we had, a very unique acquisition agreement in that we, meaning Ben & Jerry's, has an independent board of directors just for our brand that has jurisdiction over the social mission, which is like all the activism work, all the environmental work, all our values-led sourcing. And so Unilever does not have jurisdiction over the social mission. So we maintain a level of independence that is, rare and unique. And we continue to strive for our values and everything that we do. And the social mission, the culture, you asked about the culture, Ben & Jerry's really puts the social mission at the center of everything they do. It's mentioned constantly, not just in social mission department meetings, it's mentioned in all sorts of meetings, and it's a key focus of the business always. And I think that the employees here, come here for a reason. Not just to make amazing ice cream, which they do anyways, but because people really feel like they have a strong purpose here, and that, making amazing ice cream is really a foot in the door to be able to talk. Ice cream makes people happy, and it's like a way to get your foot in the door to talk about issues that are really important to society, and just opening, people up into the space of activism so that we can make systemic progressive change in the world to, help raise all people.